Welcome back to Good Morning Tobago, folks. And today is a very commemorative day. It is July 27th, and it is the anniversary of the 1990 attempted coup, of which, the government, the country of Trinidad and Tobago was under siege for 6 days. And we are starting off our conversations this morning in regards to that. Over the years, I think that um, the significance of that day, the importance of that day has gotten lost within our society. And, we forgot that at one point in time, our country was under threat. And, we don't realize how much of that trauma still exists within our society today. We don't understand how much that influences some of the things that are happening, whether it be crime, whether it be just how our society operates on a daily basis. A lot of it goes back to what happened in 1990. And, to give us a perspective on this, well, for one thing, I am actually just going to read a couple excerpts before we get into our conversation this morning with our guest. And this is from a book written by Mr. Dennis McComey. Now, and for those of you who are around during that time, you would know that Mr. Dennis McComey was a broadcast journalist. He was working with Radio 610 at the time. He was one of those journalists that were under siege as well. He was the one that was on the radio airwaves at that point in time, updating the public on what's happening when nobody knew exactly what's happening. And just, to read a little bit about just some of his experience. He said, obviously, we were still in shock. In just an hour, our whole world, as it were, was disintegrating. One moment, we were all deeply involved in our very important lives, and the next, all that had been taken for granted was wretched and jumbled. It was too fairly early into the nightmare, and all that we felt was fear of the entire situation and the urgent desire to survive. Wherever we were thought of our loved ones and where we might have been and whether or not they were safe, sounds and odors had changed immediately too. The crackle of flames, the sound of rapid gunfire, and the impact of explosions kept us on the edge and made the nightmare real. We were all shaken by the experience and exhausted from firefighting in the NBS building. Because viewers, of course, we know that our journalists at that point in time at TTT, in the radio stations, they were all affected by this. There were a lot of lives lost. And just so that you understand some of the people who have been forgotten and, who were innocently killed in this whole situation were SRP Solomon McLeod, who had volunteered to work the evening shift for a police colleague and became the first martyr on the 27th of July for the cause of TNT democracy. Assistant Superintendent Roger George, Estate Constable Malcolm Bastana, George Francis, chauffeur to Muriel Duana and McDavidson, Opposition PNM MP Walter Giuseppe, Customs and Excise Officer and former police officer Helen Lavia, Lorraine Caballero, the parliamentary clerk whom the Jamaat shot in the stomach and laid out in the ground next to Mr. Wendell Eversley. He watched her groan and writhe in pain for 2 days until her death. The young lady who was sitting comfortably in the gallery of her house when a stray bullet instantly ended her life. The mother who sought to soothe her nerves on the morning following the terrors of the Friday evening by baking a cake and then retired to bed for a nap that lasted forever. The victim of a heart attack. The homeless man caught in the fierce crossfire, his bullet-riddled body lying for 6 days with the other murdered men before being unceremoniously dumped in the unmarked grave. Many others too, innocent victims, still unidentified, who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And of course, this is a reflection from Dennis McComey as well. I remember too, Honorable Leo Devines, MP, who bled to death even after being released to the care of medical personnel and his wife, Jean Devines, once a bright light in TNT society, who chose to live like a recluse away from the society that had disappointed her. Mervyn Teague, whose camera continued to record the chilling scenes in Parliament even after he had been struck down by a bullet. I will never forget the former Minister of Justice and National Security, Selwyn Richardson, who was brutally murdered in the driveway of his house on 20th June 1995 by unknown assailants on orders, it is said, from persons unknown. And of course, Mr. Selwyn Richardson was one of those that was beaten in the house that took a lot of abuse during that time. And ultimately, we know that our then Prime Minister, Mr. A.N.R. Robinson, there we have Mr. Raoul Panton and several of the others who were kept captive in TTT for 6 days. For 6 days. This happened in Trinidad and Tobago. And, we always need to remember these things because it's only through remembering the past that you could prevent future things like this from happening. A few weeks ago, we had a number of people likening the situation here that's happening in Tobago, describing it as an administrative coup. Now, the chances of something exactly like this happening again, perhaps very slim, because we no longer have just one media house in terms of television. It's not that easy to control like the media. Well, I mean, that might be debatable. But anyways, in the same way that, the Jamaat al-Muslimin were able to storm TTT and take control of the airways, that may not happen in the same way. But we are always at risk of something happening. And we always need to be aware. So, joining me just to even discuss some of these events, we have Mr. Umar Abdullah, who is joining us online. And good morning to you, sir. How are you doing?
Greetings to you and greetings to all your viewers and listeners.
All right, now,
Thanks for having
Mr.
me.
Abdullah, I just would like for you to give me just a sense of what when you look back at 1990, what comes to your mind?
I actually don't know where to start. There's so many things. But I would start from the 31st anniversary of the attempted coup that took place here in Trinidad and Tobago. And I remember on that particular day, I would have sought permission from the then Commissioner of Police, Gary Griffith, to approach the Red House in my Muslim garb, holding the national flag, to deliver a letter to the Prime Minister and parliamentarians um, uh, on the issue of the situation that was happening around the COVID and the lockdowns and so on and so forth. And we had some information to share with the parliamentarians and the Prime Minister. And we were asking them to look at the evidence and to look at the science as regards to the issues surrounding COVID and the right approach in terms of treatment, protocols, and so on. And I did that because I wanted to believe that after 31 years, there was a lot that we would have learned, and there was a lot of healing that took place to the point where, after 31 years, a Muslim man dressed again in Muslim clothing approached the Red House. But this time, it was to extend an olive branch. And it was a mission of peace and a mission to extend to the entire Trinidad and Tobago that we as a people have learnt our lessons, and we as a people have grown and have accepted our faith and have decided to forgive. And I think that was the most important thing that came out that day. I had the full support of the police. They marched with me from Mover Junction to the Red House. It was widely televised and carried on social media. And I did deliver a speech there at the gates of the Red House as well. Now, after 31 years, for a Muslim to do that in Trinidad and Tobago, after all you would have just read, and reminded the nation of the horrors that took place during those 6 days, it shows us as a people how resilient we are, how beautiful a people we are, and how, Trinidadians and Tobagoans, we are always willing to cooperate and move forward for the better of this country. And one of the things I remember you said earlier in the program when you was, um, you know, reading that bit from the book, you indicated that you know, um, our, we took many things for granted.
Yes.
All right, and it shows us clearly that what we take for granted today, it's not only it's not only um, the people of the country has to recognize that, but we also have to indicate to our government and to our leaders that there are things that people take for granted in this country.
Mhm.
And perhaps as a government and as leaders in our society, we need to protect those things that people take for granted. And if we don't protect it, perhaps might come a time, and Almighty God forbid, that this happen in Trinidad and Tobago again,
Mhm.
because someone somewhere may want to call the government and our leaders to account for some of the things that they're perhaps doing, decisions that they're making that is affecting the lives of the citizens of this country, that is interfering with our democracy and interfering with our sovereignty in a way that we are at the brink of losing it. And I think that's the most important lesson coming out of the 1990. Of course, there are many others as well.
Yes.
We saw a drastic turnaround in the dynamics of our politics after 1990. There was a a deliberate attempt by our politicians to fix what was broken, and they made many attempts, and there was history in the making when we saw political parties coming together and on a united front to vie for a general election. And we saw the success of that and the success that it brought, ousting a government that held the reins of power for so many years in Trinidad and Tobago. And these are some of the dynamic changes that took place. And I guess amongst the politicians themselves, they would have probably started looking differently at the way they govern and at the way they engage the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Some may some may disagree and say they have not learned a lesson, but I would want to differ and indicate that yes, they did, and some of these lessons were expensive in its own way, but at at the end of the day, when any political leader or any politician or any leader in our country, whether it be within the political arena or the religious arena or the private, civil society arena, whatever it be, we have to recognize as leaders that we have to do one thing, and that is listen to the noise, listen to the people, listen what they're saying, because somewhere along the line, if we don't listen and we don't hear and we don't understand what the people are saying, we may be very well head into that very same, situation that took place in 1990, which we definitely do not want to see the face of in Trinidad and Tobago again.
Now, do you think that the government cares? Because when I asked this question, coming from the cries over the years, I read out some of the people that were lost. There are many more. I don't think that as a country we know how many lives were lost or how many people remain affected, remain injured. And we really don't know because that information just never came out, or there was never any serious, other than the commission of inquiry into the incident. There was never a serious try to see exactly what was the impact on this on our people, and who is still living with the trauma. What are the families? How are they existing? Other than the attempts of us journalists, going back every year, speaking to those affected. That seems to be the only time that we know or we have any inkling. The Prime Minister spoke this morning on another frequency, and I mean, he said that if the case comes up, he could, this government is willing to treat with compensation, but he never gave any real commitment. He never even gave any made any real decision to say, as a country, let's remember this day and let's use it as an instruction for us to pay attention to what we have in like what you said, not take things for granted and understand that we need to protect our democracy at all costs. Because when we don't, we have our people out there suffering.
Yes, exactly. And even though we had the commission of inquiry, the main author of the event never presented himself
No.
and made any statements or the case may be. So it's an untold story that I think journalists like yourself ought to consider pursuing in actually getting the stories from those persons who were the unseen, persons who this situation affected in ways and means that would have changed their lives forever, changed the way they look at life, changed the way they live in Trinidad and Tobago. We often say, in Trinidad and Tobago, there's a saying that, God is a Trini. This certainly needs to be relooked at in terms of, what would have happened in 1990, and would God continue to be a Trini if our governments and our leaders continue to not listen to the people in Trinidad and Tobago? This is a serious issue, and we have to take it for what it is. I myself would have had my experiences during the 1990 Six-Day Affair. I was a new member of the Jamatul Muslimin. Wasn't there in for long, and I would have had some experiences that would have changed my life forever. And people who follow my story and who follow what I do would actually see that and how it affected my life and my
And Mr.
transition from
Abdullah, could you give us
uh,
an idea of, what was your experience and how did it change your life for those who may be watching and do not know?
well I let me begin by saying before I had joined with the Jamaat al-Muslimin back in 19 it was 1989. I was an atheist. I never believed that there was an almighty God, that there was a supreme being. And even though I was born in a Muslim home and I, carried out the tenets of Islam and the religious duties and so on, you would have seen me attending the masjid and so on, because I was born in a strict Islamic home, and I had to do those things. And as I grew older, I started to realize and then look around me and see the decadence that was surrounding me as a youth growing up in Trinidad and Tobago and looking at my grim and glim future. I decided at the age of 13, when I was 13 years old, to form a youth drive initiative, which is an organization that was geared towards bringing about good in a society and fighting for the rights and privileges of, you know, human beings, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And I always, even though I didn't believe that there was a God, I always felt that there was goodness. And you needed to be good. You needed to be kind. You needed to be generous. You needed to help one another. You needed to support one another. And this was one of the reasons why the organization was formed. And I continued with that idea in my mind. And when I was introduced to Jamaat al-Muslimin, it was told to me that this group actually has the same ideology that you have. Even that was not convincing enough for me to believe in the Almighty God. It's a personal something that took place in my life, which I don't want to go in here on while I'm in this interview. But that particular incident changed my life forever and made me to understand that there is a supreme being. And I made a pledge once I would have gotten myself out of that situation because it was a situation that really had me scared. And once I made that promise, once I get myself out of that and I, raised my hand and, said a prayer and I said to whatever, supreme being that there is, if there is one, please help me out of this. And, it so happened that I was free of that situation and I made a promise that I would be a trusted servant for the rest of my life, worshiping and obeying Almighty God. And that is where the journey all started.
Mm.
And when I became part of Jamaat al-Muslimin, I thought that being part of that organization would have brought me closer to that objective that I have in bringing about peace and unity and love within the Trinidad and Tobago space. And, when the incident took place, we had no idea. I had actually, with my radical views at the time, moved out from my mother's home and I was actually staying and living in the masjid. And there were different branches of the Jamaat al-Muslimin at that time. And we were in the Tableland district at the time where we had established a masjid there. And I was staying in that masjid when the incident took place. And remember very vividly that we had no idea that this was about to hit Trinidad and Tobago. The upper hierarchy of the Jamaat al-Muslimin had made that decision and they had, a specific purpose in mind and a specific, course of action that they would have, charted out. And the rest of the Jamaat al-Muslimin, the membership, general membership, had no idea that this was actually going to happen. We were informed just like everybody else when the he overtook the control of the TTT,
Mm-hmm.
and he came on television and said that the government has been overthrown. And at that point in time, we knew that it was not going to be, easy after that. And, we had to scramble and put things in place to protect ourselves and to try to understand what was exactly happening, try to make communication and contact with a number of persons who were in the upper levels of the administration and so on. I remember Saturday we had gone to the compound of Jamaat al-Muslimin, myself and three other brothers. And when we got there, we were greeted by soldiers. We thought that the soldiers dressed in camo were members of the Jamaat al-Muslimin and they were protecting the compound. That is actually what we had thought. But it is actually the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force that was actually had taken control of the compound. And they came out and, met with us. And they were actually going to kill us. They lined us up and they were going to kill us on the compound that Saturday morning. And I remember commander who was in charge of the operations there at the Jamaat al-Muslimin compound came out and had a conversation with us. And he told us he's going to give us a chance and he's going to allow us to live and he don't want to see us ever in any masjid or out in the streets because remember, they were now putting in place the curfew situation and so on because this is just Friday the incident took place and we were allowed to leave. So we were prepared to die on that day, and we were prepared to accept that we were dying for a cause, and we were dying for something that was good because, as we were told in the beginning, that this was a response to government, um, you know, oppressive behavior to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And there were a lot of things that took place at that time. A number of Trinidadians and Tobagonians that were not aware and are not prepared to go into details in those issues here on this program. but persons who really, really want to know the truth about what took place and what caused and led up that situation to happen. It would be good of you to speak to the authors of that incident or that event, and persons who were directly involved in some way or the other, like myself and so on. I mean, I was not directly involved in the planning and executing of that event. We had no idea at all. All right. Even one of the major heads that was in Rio Claro at the time, he too also had no idea that this event was going to happen. So it was just amongst key stakeholders within the organization, and I guess they had their things planned out and how they were going to execute and how they were going to get out of it. But it all took a different turn, and there are lessons in that too as well for us to learn and in our approaches and how we respond. And that is why over the years, leaving the radical side, I've learned a lot that radicalism is not always the way that is would be would be um, good to use to address any situation.
Mhm.
And I've learned that having dialogue and having peaceful conversation and responding in a manner that does not poke at people, does not aggravate persons and that sort of thing, is always you get a better response and you get better results. And so I've moved away from that radical stance that I would have had in the past. And everybody who knows me knows how I was and where I have been and where I'm at today. Presently, right now, I'm in a peaceful protest in front of the Ministry of Education.
And we're going to
Every
get
day we
into
have been
that.
there since the 23rd of June. Yeah,
Yes, and I want to
yeah.
get into that, but
But
I know we have to go for a
yeah,
break. But just before we go
yeah.
to a break, and we come back and we'll actually address that matter for that protest. I want to know from you. What does democracy mean to you now after everything that has happened? And take into context 1990. What does democracy for Trinidad and Tobago mean for you as a citizen?
Democracy for me, now, first of all, I want to put it outside there very clearly. I'm a Muslim, and Islam does not ascribe to democracy as a political um, solution. All right, but democracy is what it is we have as a people. And in democracy, there's one thing that every single human being holds on to, and that is the power of the people, the right of the people, the right to be heard, the right to speak, the right to live with uh, with with um, with a type of freedom that allows for the positive growth and development of a people. And because of this, I think it is highly important that we try at our best to preserve that. Because if it's one thing that's going to get us from a good place which we are in already to an excellent place which is where we want to be, it is that platform of democracy. And I don't think there's any other platform that is going to provide that avenue for us to move or to transcend from one position to the other. And that is what I think of democracy. And I trust my children with what we understand as true democracy. I trust the the future of our infrastructure, the future of job opportunities for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, the future of agriculture and food security. I trust all of that in the hands of what true democracy, what our founding father, Eric William, would have mounted a platform and explained to the people of Trinidad and Tobago what democracy is. And I think if it is, we can somehow, ask our leaders, ask our governments, our political parties to consider that and see what they can do to bring it back to that point, we will be very, very grateful as a people. I individually would be thoroughly grateful for that. And I think once we're back at that point, because I don't think that democracy that we have existing today is what Eric Williams would have taught us about. So we need to go back there. And I think once we're in that space, I think Trinidad and Tobago is going to be a beacon for the rest of the world, not just for the region, but for the rest of the world.
All right. Well, Ms. Abdullah, we're going to have to take a pause there. And when we come back, we'll continue our conversations. And we're going to switch things up a little bit. And we're talking about another issue that Mr. Abdullah has been leading within the space of Trinidad and Tobago, which is important in the context of democracy as well. So we're going to get into that when we come back after this break.
From the experts that created the Zinger sandwich comes the KFC Crispy Barbecue Zinger.
The only one I see is you.
Cheddar cheese, crispy onions, the most delicious Kentucky Fried Chicken, and barbecue sauce. Get ready for a whole new level of flavor.
Come one, come all. It's time to join in the Tobago Heritage Festival 2023. Homage. All are we and all are who we be.
To Tobago.
Indulge in the awesomeness that is embodied in the spirit of Tobago at the 36th Tobago Heritage Festival. Celebrate a rich, vibrant, hypnotic showcase of our cultural legacy. Yes, from July 21st to August 1st, 2023. Take the island tour. Sample the sumptuous variety of local indigenous delicacies. Enjoy the recreation of old-time village life. Dance to the drum. Feel the rhythm of steel pan. Experience the way of life, languages, and oral traditions. Be part of the journey to our we heritage, honoring our past, celebrating our present, and inspiring our future. Relive our unique culture. Join in the preservation of the heritage of we island of Tobago.
Are you flood ready? Review and update insurance coverage. Install floodgates and barriers. Create a family flood plan. An initiative to help people prevent, prepare, recover. TATIL, where people are people.
Inner Health, number 13B Portmore, Scarborough, Tobago, with over 25 years experience offering services in and not limited to microscopic blood analysis, reflexology, and the sale of a wide range of organic herbal products used to supplement thyroid, lymphatic, heart, kidney, and brain health, and the male and female reproductive systems. Come and chat with us. Remember, your health is your wealth.
This is how it's gonna go. They better look up below, 'cause this is your show, and everybody's gonna know. Say it to them once again. They better look up below. This is your show, and everybody's gonna know. That's how it's gonna go. They better look up below, 'cause this is your show. Yeah. Hey.
Tobago Update.
welcome back to Good Morning Tobago on Tobago Updates. Viewers, we are speaking with Mr. Umar Abdullah, who is the head of the First Wave movement. And, one of the things that Mr. Abdullah has been leading within the space, I don't know if you've been paying attention, are these peaceful protests in regards to what's happening within our education system. And it is also in protests towards a conspiracy to corrupt the nation's children. So, Mr. Abdullah, could you just give us an idea of exactly what do you mean when you are speaking about these things? Your tagline for these protests is "Not my children."
Right. I just want to make one correction though. You said conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy.
Okay.
It's actually happening. And we have the evidence that is in fact happening in our schools presently. It is the intention of the Ministry of Education to introduce certain dangerous ideologies and indoctrination into our nation's schools. And we have been speaking to that issue since the 23rd of June. And today is going to be 35 days that we are going to be in front of the Ministry of Education there in St. Vincent Street in Port of Spain. It's a silent protest. We've informed the Commissioner of Police for our presence there, and our presence are going to be continued until the Minister does respond to our letter, which we had written on the 23rd of June. We have written another letter, which I'm going to dispatch today, which is asking for an update on that letter that we would have written, what sort of response we would get, etc. We are just asking, with a follow-up letter, reminding her that we had written a letter to her, and we need to get a response on that letter. Not even an acknowledgement letter would we have received. However, they did indicate, by informing the security personnel at the building, that they would have received the letter because it was also hand-delivered, and they have it on the desk for consideration. So what exactly does that mean? We're not sure, right? So what we are saying is that, we are raising an alarm, and we are warning parents and teachers, educators in Trinidad and Tobago that all these incidences that we are seeing on a global scale, what is happening internationally in the different schools in Maryland and America, and we're getting reports back here in Trinidad and Tobago. This is what's happening in those primary schools. These are the kind of books that they're introducing into the schools and so on and so forth. They are reading all of them from the same playbook, right? Which is a manual that was published by UNICEF, Child Friendly School Initiative. And we have in Tobago presently, they have piloted that project where they have 12 schools that are already selected in Tobago under that particular program. When the Minister of Education was asked about inclusivity, she said inclusivity in the broader sense of the word. Now, we would have been on a number of platforms, Zoom meetings and so on, with a number of stakeholders, and they all seem to be talking about disabled children and the less privileged children and so on. But none of them are talking about what she referred to, inclusivity in the broader sense of the word. And she added and coined the term psychosocial disability. What exactly is psychosocial disability? Anyone hearing that will automatically think it has to do with some sort of mental disorder. So are we saying that you are going to include certain aspects within our education system that is deemed a mental disorder by all definition? As we know, there are a number of disorders that was listed on the American Psychiatric Association, and if you look at that list, you would definitely see some of these cases there. All we are saying is that we don't want that type of ideology, those harmful ideologies into our schools. Let our children decide when they become adults what they want to be, or what they, what sort of lifestyle they want to pursue. And even at that point in time, there is discussion with parents and different stakeholders to advise young people in making decisions. We have the United Nations and the WHO coming out clearly in a report indicating that they are, promoting or proposing sexual partners for children as early as 2 years old. And, and they have different age brackets as to what children ought to be practicing and doing at that age bracket. And we have issues such as masturbation and having sexual intercourse and so on and so forth, all well under the age of consent here in Trinidad and Tobago. So we are asking for definitive answers to these questions. We know for a fact that this country is signatory to a treaty called the Montevideo Consensus, which was signed back in 2013 by the last administration, which was the UNC government. And there was some reporting on it in 2017 and 2022. And guess what? In that reporting, we are at 100% policy framework, right? So 100% policy framework is in place already for this type of ideology. And the 52% of the curriculum, they have introduced 52% of it in the curriculum at Trinidad and Tobago already. And that's last reporting 2017, 2022. All right. There's another reporting has to come forward in 2023. We would have had this present administration, the Minister of Planning and Development then, Penelope Bickers, would have met with the United Nations Population Fund back in 2022. The same time that the IPPF, the International Pan-Parental Federation, would have set up their regional office here, and the United Nations Population Fund heavily funds the IPPF, and that's one of the main direction of the IPPF is to introduce into the schools comprehensive sexuality education. And all we are saying is that we are saying no to this, and we want to protect our children. And there are a number of other issues as well, like, for instance, the signing of the International Pandemic Accord, which the Prime Minister have already given his nod to do. And what we are saying is that, and since we're on the topic of democracy, that International Pandemic Accord is going to erase our democracy and our sovereignty. We're going to give total autonomy to the WHO as regards to our health, our climate, and our crime here in the Trinidad and Tobago. So, and we have to understand and keep in mind that the WHO is not an elected body. The head of the WHO is not an elected official or has been elected. So these are private entities. And we have a democracy here where we have elected officials. And by all measure, our elected official has to consult with the people before they sign these types of agreements that is going to affect the lives of our citizens in this country. And if there was no consultation, then there's a question of whether or not these agreements and these arrangements with those international bodies are legitimate, and if it is not, null and void. So the people of Trinidad and Tobago continuously has to be reminded of the power that they have before we lose it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
and
Mr.
that was yeah.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Abdullah, and I want to thank you so much for sharing those concerns. But unfortunately, we are basically out of time. But I really appreciate you being here and sharing that. All right. And as we go, viewers, I just want to read a little bit. I mean, as Mr. Abdullah touched on democracy, and which is something we really needed to pay attention here in Trinidad and Tobago, even as we remember the July 27, 1990 coup. I want to just read a few words from Dr. Eric Williams on the occasion of the 31st of August as to what democracy means. And he said, democracy at home and abroad, the symbol of it is our parliament. Remember, fellow citizens, we now have a parliament. We no longer have the colonial assemblies, which did not have the full rights of a parliament of a sovereign country. The very name parliament testifies to our new independent status. By that same token, however, we at once became the object of comparison with any other parliamentary countries inside and outside the Commonwealth. This is a consideration which involves not only the members of parliament, but also the individual citizen. The members of parliament have the traditional parliamentary privileges guaranteed by in the Constitution. The Speaker, the symbol of the power of parliament, and its status guaranteed in the order of precedence. We shall soon have the privileges built, protecting and prescribing the powers of parliament itself. Measures are being taken to establish the responsibility of parliament in the field of external relations. The Constitution recognizes the position of the leader of the opposition. The normal parliamentary conventions of consultation between government and opposition are being steadily developed and expanded. The Constitution itself, independent itself, represents the agreement of two political parties on the fundamental question of national unity. The ordinary citizen must recognize the role of Parliament, whom he may like or dislike, and respect that must be accorded to the same member of Parliament ex officio. I call on all citizens from now on to the accord to the highest respect of our Parliament system and the institutions and to our Parliament itself. Democracy finally rests on the higher power than Parliament. It rests on an informed and alert public opinion. The members of Parliament are only the representatives of the citizens. They cannot represent apathy and indifference. They can play the part allotted to them only if they represent intelligence and public spiritedness. Nothing has so demonstrated. All right, and I'll just kind of stop there. But these are the words of our first Prime Minister, Dr. Eric Williams, as we think about democracy. And again, I just want to thank you, Mr. Abdullah. All of our conversations this morning spoke to that, and it's such an important thing to remember as we remember 1990.
Yeah.
All right, viewers, and that's how we're going to end our program this morning. Thank you for being with us. It was such a privilege being here. And just stay tuned. We got news coming up at 6:30 this evening, so you don't want to miss that, as well as all the other programs throughout the day.
It's a brand new morning, rise up to a brand new dawning as the passion start around.